Let's talk about gear. If you want to go backpacking or do like literally anything in the outdoors, the thing that most people do wrong on their first go of backpacking is they think they need all the things that they don't need and drop like a few several $1,000s. So let's dive in and talk about specific things. I'm Jack Bynum. I run a company called Indigo Alpine Guides, and we run backpacking and climbing and mountaineering and skiing trips all over the Pacific Northwest, and then also up in Alaska and Patagonia and Nepal, and then custom trips worldwide. And I've been guiding for a little over 10 years now. I started guiding in Alaska quite a while ago and doing fly and backpacking trips in the Wrangells way back when. And then I loved it so much that I just wanted a little bit more. And so I started guiding month-long trips. So a group of 8 to 12 people, 1 month in the mountains, all over the country, different spots. And I got hooked. There's like no better way to get to know yourself and get to know other people and form these deep, beautiful, intimate connections than spending a month wandering some mountain range, some remote place together. I feel like backpacking has been the foundation by which I've run my life for a long time. I went on my first backpacking trip when I was 12, and I remember vividly being at the top of this 13,000-foot mountain in the Bighorn Mountains, and we got caught in this crazy hailstorm, thunderstorm, and had to run downhill as fast as we could to get away from some lightning danger. And the wildflowers were blooming, and this, pebble-sized, pea-sized hail was falling on us. And we ran all the way down the valley through the snow in our summertime shorts. And then the sun came out and we rested and dried out on these rocks, and I was hooked. And that doesn't have to be the kind of experience that you're after. I think one thing that I want to emphasize is that there's a lot of different ways to go explore the mountains, and there's really no right way. Whatever way you're excited to do it is great. I obviously have a bias because I've been doing it for a long time. So I'm going to present a way that I think makes a lot of sense, but know that there's really no rules. Like, you get to play and have fun and do what you want. For me, it's been the way that I've seen some of the most incredible parts of the world, incredible sunrises, incredible sunsets. And it's helped me slow down and step away from this like pretty busy society that I live in, of the phones binging and the emails and all of those things, and just to take a deep breath and remember that there's another life possible and another thing that's also happening simultaneously. And it's been a way to form these deep, really long lasting connections. There's something about going into the mountains with someone where all of the structures of modern, normal human connection just kind of go away, and you get to play and do whatever. And all of a sudden, at the end of a 10-day trip, you feel like you've known someone for years and years and years, and kind of like taken this little shortcut around all of the time it takes to become friends with someone. So it's been this avenue for creating really intimate and fun friendships that way. And it's just been really fun. It's just been an opportunity to be really goofy and childlike, which I love as well. So now I have the coolest job in the world, and I just get to spend my entire year going on different trips to places that I get really excited about, and taking people with me and expounding on a lot of knowledge and helping people get to their own skill set that they can take forward with them doing their own trips in the future. What we're going to cover today, we're going to go really pretty efficiently quick through things. We're going to get kind of technical really quick. So don't get overwhelmed. If something's like a little bit like too in-depth or too technical for you, know that we'll get to something else really soon. Every little nugget's probably only going to be a few minutes. We're going to start with picking a trip. Then we'll get into some really basic navigation. And then we'll cover the big daunting task of like, how do you pull together the gear for your trip? Maybe the even more daunting task for some folks, planning and cooking your food while you're in the backcountry. And then just a little bit about emergency preparedness and how to stay safe in the mountains. And then some kind of like just an odd bag of solid tips before you go on your first trip. This can feel like one of the hurdles to actually making a trip happen. I think for a lot of folks, backpacking is this dream that they have, but there's so many unknowns and so many question marks that they never quite like can get the activation energy to make it happen, because there's so many unknowns and decisions to be made. So I want to help you just like dial it down a little bit and like pick something really fast. Take the leap of faith and just go for it. And one of the things that I always advocate for folks is to start local. Like, you don't need to plan a trip that's thousands of miles away or in a different country or in a different state. You can just pick the hiking trail or the running trail that you go on every weekend and say like, hey, I'm just going to do the same trip, but I'm going to camp at the lake that I always run to, and then I'll come back out the next day. So start with something really close by, something that you're maybe even familiar with, and that'll be a really great way to go. The other thing is to pick people that you're already comfortable with. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the mountains have a way of exposing us to feeling pretty vulnerable. And like all of a sudden we're like, oh, it might be hard. You want people who you can communicate with effectively and who you're not afraid to share your true feelings about how things are going or about the ways you're uncomfortable or the ways you're having a great time. You want someone that you can share openly with. If you can find a mentor, that's awesome. But I know that not everyone has that accessibility. So that's not a prerequisite at all. And then I think the other thing that a lot of people who go on their first backpacking trip mess up or struggle with is they plan this massive trip that they just aren't physically ready for. They think, oh, I can hike 10 miles in a day, so I can backpack 10 too, totally underestimating how much effort goes into carrying a pack and setting up camp and cooking meals. So start really small and let the newness be the experience and not so much covering a ton of ground. I love going on backpacking trips where I cover 25, 30 miles a day. And that might be the sort of thing that you're excited for, but definitely don't start there. And then the other thing, and this is different, I know we have people coming from international, so I'll just speak to the US at least, that permitting can be stressful in this country because every place that you go has its own permitting process. But don't worry about it too much. Just look it up. There'll be some quick info online. You'll figure out if it's a place that needs permits or doesn't need permits. And some places need permits and it's kind of cutthroat to get those permits, but that doesn't mean that you can't go backpacking. There's, for every place like that where it takes years and years to get a permit, there's hundreds and hundreds of places in this country that have the simplest permitting process. And also, especially in Washington, there's a lot of places where you have to apply like months in advance and it's hard to figure out the logistics and you have to get online and like open the website just as it opens, etc. But for most of the places, at least in America, where they require reserving permits, they also usually have a subset of permits or a certain percentage of permits that you can get but just by walking up the day of. And so oftentimes, even if a place that you really want to go doesn't have any reserved permits available, you can usually walk up right as that walk-in window opens and get a permit the day of. So that's a cool little trick. So to help you kind of like ground this and think through this, I have just done the exact same thing. Like I put myself in the shoes. I live in Seattle, Washington right now. It's a beautiful, although smoky day outside. And the fall is proving to be abnormally dry, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you think about it. And I'm going to say I'm a beginner backpacker. Maybe I've never gone backpacking before, or maybe I've gone on like 1 or 2 trips. And I just went onto Google, the massive, beautiful Google, and just said, this beginner backpacking trips in Washington. And right away, I came up with a list of like 25. Now, the downside of doing it this way is that you're certainly not going to find places that are undiscovered, but that can be kind of nice. You have other people around, it feels a little bit more comfortable, and there's a lot of resources. So I picked one from that list of top 25 best beginner backpacking trips. And I picked the High Divide Loop Seven Lakes Basin because it's out in the Olympic Range, which is just 2 hours west of here. I know I really love it out there. It's a really cool spot. It's close to the ocean. It's a slightly different climate. I also know right now, which is kind of a weird thing to be thinking about, that the air quality is a bit better out there than it is to the east of me. I know that I don't want to go very far, and I also don't want to try super hard and have some like massive physical Stairmaster effort. So I picked something that doesn't have a ton of elevation gain over the span of the trip. You know, it's October. It's not too cold, but it's getting colder. I looked at the forecast. It's 70 degrees during the day and 40 degrees at night, which is nice to like have a highest point of 5,000 feet. If I was going way up into the mountains, then I might start getting a lot colder, and I don't really want to deal with that. I think for your first backpacking trips, it's nice to pick a place or at least a season where it's not getting super duper cold and you don't have to deal with like frozen boots in the morning and that sort of thing. That can be a rude awakening. I know that water's easily available. It's in Olympic National Park, so I haven't actually figured out the permitting process yet for this trip that I'm not actually going to take, this hypothetical trip. I know that I would have to get permits in advance, but I also know that I could probably walk in the day before or the day of and get a permit for this exact loop. Then another thing to think about is if you're camping at any place that has bears, so most of the Pacific Northwest out here, Colorado, Alaska, in the States, and then you'd have to figure out based on the place that you're living. Here, bear canisters are required. And we'll talk a little bit more about bear protocol and how to manage your food. But for this specific trip, I'll need bear canisters. But the nice thing about this is that most of the places in the States that require bear canisters specifically will rent them to you for free. So I don't need to like go out and pay for a bear canister. That'll all be taken care of. I know that I need to camp at designated sites, and I know that I can't have any fires above 3,500 feet, which is a little sad, but I'm not going to spend that much time above 3,500 feet. And it's really smoky all around Washington right now anyways, and the fire danger is kind of high, so I don't think I want to mess with fires anyways. Just like that, within like 7 minutes, I picked a trip, dealt with that whole decision-making process, You might have a different decision-making process, and that's totally cool. But for me, I just like needed to get over that hump of like, oh, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And now I've decided, so I can move forward with my planning. There's a lot of different ways to navigate. When I started guiding, it was all paper maps and compasses. And I really love that. There's like a beautiful art form to reading maps, to navigating in that kind of way. Admittedly, though, I almost never use a paper map anymore because technology has made it so easy. And I personally bring my phone to the backcountry anyways. So I just use my phone the entire time. I think learning how to read paper maps is great and is also really important just as a backup, right? Technology is not always the most reliable, and sometimes your phones die or break or whatever. So you want to have some capacity to read paper maps. But also, if you can't perfectly read a topo map being like this map here on the right side with all these brown lines, that's totally okay. And there's ways to navigate without it. And that's what I'm going to show you right now. So for 95%, what I used right now for navigation is Gaia. And Gaia is a free app. You can pay for it. I actually still use the free version because it works so well for everything that I need. And you can download Gaia onto your phone, and it has maps for the entire world, actually, for most of the entire world. I'm planning a backpacking trip in Nepal right now. I'm leaving in 2 weeks just for a long walk by myself. And I was really kind of surprised to see that I just like zoomed over to Nepal in Gaia and uploaded my entire route, and boom, boom, had perfect free maps for the entire trip that I was going to do. Here's how that works. Here's how that process goes with Gaia. First, I go to CalTopo, which is a different website, but also free online. And well, I actually go to Google. I go to Google and I type in Seven Lakes Basin, High Peaks Loop, and then I just type in the words CalTopo. And usually, if it's a place that people have been a lot, you'll get the first link in Google will just take you right to a map. Someone's already mapped it, or the National Forest Service has already mapped it in CalTopo. And you want to look over to make sure it seems right and seems accurate. But oftentimes, it's a really easy way to just pull up an electronic map with the whole route already drawn in. And it takes 2 seconds. We're going to go right into export, and we're just going to export this entire file. And then from there, we can import it right into Gaia. So I basically picked the route. I typed in the route name plus the words CalTopo, and then I exported that file and I imported it right into Gaia. Then the nice thing about that is that now I just have that route in Gaia, and that little orange gold triangle is me at the trailhead getting ready to go backpacking. And as I go, even without service, it's just going to track my progress along, and I'll have a pretty reliable way of knowing all the time where I'm at on my route. Here's me getting back towards the trailhead, almost finished with my 3-day backpacking trip. So that's a really simple and awesome way to just navigate pretty seamlessly and pretty simply. The only things you have to remember to make that work smoothly and do that right is to make sure you download the maps before you go and get out of Wi-Fi or get out of service. And then also make sure you don't have your phone die while you're out there. So having the battery fully charged before you leave, and then having your phone on airplane mode and on low power mode. And I heard some folks who were planning these long trips like the AT or the PCT, you can do this for really long trips too. So you don't need to do this just for small trips. You could look up an entire GPS track for the entire AT and put that in your phone as well. So that'd be a super simple way, right? If you have paper maps for the entire AT, that's going to weigh a lot and be a lot of paper. Let's talk about gear. I think there's a lot of marketing out there these days that tells you that if you want to go backpacking or do like literally anything in the outdoors, you need to go to REI or whatever your comparable local gear store is and drop like several $1,000s. And that could be true. That could be your style. That's totally fine. But it's definitely not the only way to go about it. So if you're out there and you're like really wanting to start backpacking, but you're like looking at some price tags and being overwhelmed by them, no stress. There's lots of really great places for used gear. And I use these places too because they have like tons of incredible stuff for really cheap prices. So OfferUp, Facebook Marketplace, Seattle and most big cities have some like specific Facebook gear swap. So here it's the hikers and climbers gear swap. Mountain Project, which is a climbers app, has a whole gear swap forum. Cascade Climbers, which is specific to here, has a whole gear swap forum. So check those places out. There's tons of backpacking gear on there for practically nothing. And then you could also rent to get started. So REI has actually really reasonable rental prices. Local outdoor stores like Ascent Outdoors in Seattle do as well. And then more and more, I'm seeing like an Airbnb of outdoor gear start to pop up. So like, for example, there's this place in Seattle called Gear House where you just pay a flat monthly fee and you can have all the outdoor gear that you possibly want. They just have this massive warehouse of all these nice tents and backpacks and everything. So that'd be another simple way to do it. Or you could just hit up your neighbor or your friend who's an avid backpacker and be like, hey, I really want to try this out. Can I borrow like almost all of your stuff? And maybe they'll say yes. And that would be really simple too. I think the biggest point here, though, is that you don't have to be an ultralight backpacking snob, But the thing that most people do wrong on their first go of backpacking is they think they need all the things that they don't need. Or they want to go ultra light, but they just buy the fanciest, lightest version of everything instead of just bringing the bare minimum of the things that they do need. So let's dive in and talk about specific things. People used to backpack like this. So whatever you come up with is probably going to be a step up from this awesome technology that we used to rock. So here's a gear list or a gear shot from someone who is about to hike the AT. So kind of like laying it all out and getting a good visual of what's about to come. And we'll dive into the individual things. On the left, we just have a backpack. I think the simpler, the better. A lot of backpacks these days have a lot of bells and whistles, and that's often because they think people like that. But the more bells and whistles, the heavier it is, the more complex it is. Backpack could just really be a tube of fabric and that's it. But it should be comfortable. It's nice to not have it rubbing on your back, so try out a few. And then just a regular tent and shelter and a ground sheet. Sleeping bag. I looked up the weather for this upcoming trip and it's going to be 40 degrees at night. And I really have like a terrible time on trips if I'm cold the entire time. So I know that I'm going to bring my 20-degree bag and have just a lot of wiggle room. I'll just be able to sleep without any puffies on or without any jackets on and probably stay warm all night long. And that's going to make me really happy. And I have an inflatable mattress, but a foam one would work too. And I spend a lot of nights in the backcountry, like almost 200 every year. So I have a little pillow because otherwise my neck hurts. Cooking, you can kind of go a lot of different routes with this. On month-long trips, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in food planning, we would have multiple stoves and cook really elaborate meals. But on the vast majority of like 2 or 3 day trips that I do throughout the summer, I like to keep it pretty simple because I go out into the backcountry to like move through the mountains and enjoy the space, not so much to like cook and clean dishes. But whatever your cup of tea is fine. So here we have a canister stove, a really small little stove. It's incredible how small they've gotten these days. And a little mini lighter. A nice little pro tip is to take off the little lighter guard that you find on these things. So it's a little bit easier to use when your hands are a little cold in the morning. And then some sort of cooking pot and a spoon. With the stove thing, especially if you're like going into REI right now or going online and be like, oh gosh, there's so many options. What have we done in this modern society? There's like 170 different types of stoves to choose from. You really just have 2 main choices. And the main choice if you're about to go buy a stove is either to use canister fuel or to use liquid fuel. Both have some pros and cons, and honestly, when it comes down to it, it just doesn't matter that much. The main things about using white gas is that it's really versatile. If you bought this one stove, this is a Whisperlight International right here, you could use this stove in any country around the world with pretty much any fuel you could find, so gasoline or kerosene or whatever. And it's really awesome because you can fix it yourself. It's a bit more sustainable because you just use that same red canister right there and refill it with fuel all the time. For liquid fuel, oftentimes 2 ounces per person per day is enough for really simple cooking. The other option is canister stoves. And so this red canister right here is just pre-compressed fuel. And then all you have to do is just screw the stove in. And so these ones are really simple and really easy. Admittedly, they're the ones that I use for 90% of my trips these days. The downside, though, is that they're quite a bit less sustainable. So when these canisters are done, you can recycle them, but you have to drop them off at a specific mixed metal spot that will take mixed metals. You can't usually just put them in your at-home recycling bin. So over a lifetime of backpacking, it's kind of a lot of metal to be throwing away compared to a liquid fuel stove. Water. I have gone down the route of drinking water that was untreated in the mountains, and I'll tell you, it was not a fun life experience that I would not recommend to anyone. In places like Alaska, where there's almost no humans and it's really remote and there's not that many animals, I will sometimes just drink straight out of streams, straight out of glaciers. There is something like truly magical about dipping your mouth right into a river and just slurping like a straw. It feels really special and beautiful. But in the lower 48, it's usually not the thing that I'm going to go for. Let's talk about treating water so that you can not get sick out here. The main way that I'd probably recommend for the vast majority of people is a filter. This is what a lot of people use. There's a lot of different models out there. But I think if I had to pick one, I'd definitely pick the Sawyer Squeeze. It's like $26 on Amazon and lasts for an obscene number of gallons of water. So this is what I'd choose for most 3-season backpacking. The downside, though, is that if it freezes at night or really any point on your trip and you let the Sawyer Squeeze freeze, then it's just going to be broken because the filter inside will expand and won't filter your water anymore. So this is really great as long as it's not dropping below freezing. The other main option, and I use this for years, is chemical treatment. And the one that I would choose there is Aquamira. The downside is that after you put it in your water, it takes about 15 to 30 minutes before you can actually drink. So there's usually this lag of like, you're so thirsty, but you have to wait. And also, I don't know that it's the healthiest to constantly be drinking that stuff. Then the third option is UV rays. And these are pretty cool. I just got one of these recently because I was pretty excited about it. And it's just a SteriPen. Basically, it just takes a minute and a half to spread some light rays through your water and kill all the bacteria. And then you're good to drink. So we've talked about a bunch of things. Let's talk about just clothing that's in my pack at the moment, as opposed to the clothing that I'd be wearing on my body on like an average 3-season summertime backpacking trip. I've got a puffy, another mid-layer kind of sweater, some long johns, some wool socks, and some Crocs. These Crocs happen to have some bedazzles in them. I have a slight preference for Crocs that don't have holes in them. That way, when you're walking through the dewy grass in the morning, your socks don't get wet. But whatever your favorite footwear is for camp is awesome. That way, when you roll into camp and your feet are wet, you can just strip off those wet socks and wet shoes and put on a dry pair. And then, of course, rain gear, pretty much always, regardless of where I'm going. This is kind of a choice. You know, some people will go to the mountains to just tap out of electronics. If you choose to go out of the mountains and tap out, that's awesome. Oftentimes, I'll bring my phone and I'll bring a little charger and I'll bring a little battery pack because I'm relying on my phone for so many things, particularly mapping in Gaia while I'm in the mountains. Personal hygiene, you can totally go into the mountains and just get rugged with it, like get dirty, get gross, and own it. That's all good. I've definitely been there before. I've done that route. These days, I like to stay pretty clean about the whole thing. So I've seen people bring like these beautiful little bags of all sorts of fun things, like hand sanitizer and moisturizers and like lavender for night, whatever works for you. Some bug spray, some earplugs for if your person's snoring next to you, and some toilet paper. Okay, let's talk about the thing that gets a lot of people quite scared about backpacking: pooping in the woods. I can't tell you how many times I have had clients try to go the entire 7 days without pooping. It is a silly, ridiculous objective. So just get comfortable with it. May take some time, might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but know that your pooping in the woods time is some of the most beautiful bathrooms you'll ever have in your entire life. Like, you'll get your own little spot with the sunset overlooking a big glacial valley or overlooking the canyons with a light dusting of snow. It's awesome. You'll need a poop shovel. This is a really nice ultralight one, but really any kind of poop shovel will work. It could be your garden shovel. Some soap, some hand sani, some toilet paper, and then a plastic bag to carry that toilet paper out. We don't want to bury the toilet paper, particularly in places that get a lot of use, because animals will dig it up and then there's just going to be like kind of dirty toilet paper spread all around. So dig a hole that's 6 inches deep, about 200 feet away from your camp or from water. Do your thing, bury it really well, and then pack out all your TP. There's this thing that has happened, and I don't really know how this started, but people will put little toilet paper on top of their hole just to flag it so that no one else goes there. But then in places like Yosemite or the High Sierras or the enchantments up here, you'll get these fields of little flagged holes. So don't be that person. For folks who squat to pee, you'll want some sort of pee rag, or you can air dry your cup of tea, your choice, go for it. I also keep hearing about these things called Kula cloths, which are basically just really fun pee rags, and they have an antimicrobial substance in them that keeps you cleaner. So that's another option. And if you use a Diva cup or a menstrual cup, you can just empty that into a cat hole and then pack out anything else. The other thing that I didn't mention that people often love is having some baby wipes to just give themselves a little shower, but swimming in lakes works enough for me, and the cold water is awesome. First aid kit. This is a really slimmed down first aid kit. I'd probably recommend going with something quite a bit beefier than this. And the simplest option is just to go to any of the big stores and buy one of the adventure medical kits. I got one of those recently and I'm pretty happy with it, in addition to my big expedition kit for longer trips. So that's probably the simplest way to do it, but obviously you can also just go and put together your own one. And do your best to know what's in it. Don't just go get a medical kit and never open it. If you buy one of the pre-made ones, actually open it up, see what's available, see what you have, so that if you do end up needing to use it, it's not your first time opening up the bag. Some little odds and ends. Got some backup paper maps. Again, I'll use Gaia for the vast majority of the time, but if my phone dies, it's nice to have some other options. Got some cards in case the entire trip is raining. I'm not going to sugarcoat it to you. I've gone on 10, 14-day backpacking trips where we've had 1 day of sun. It is a reality, so you just want to be ready for it and cognizant of it. A little backup headlamp. And then that little orange device is called an inReach. It's basically a satellite communicator. So it's a way for you to be able to contact the outside world if you really need to. And some people use this as a way to just check in with their loved ones every night, be like, hey, I'm all good. And some people use it as just in emergencies. But I'll say it is pretty darn nice to have. It's not a requirement, but it is pretty darn nice to have. So we covered clothing that was in my pack while I was hiking. And then here's what I'm wearing on pretty much 99% of the trips that I ever go on, whether that's backpacking or mountaineering or climbing. these 3 layers is basically all I wear. And then I just add a big puffy to it if it's colder out. So I have a sunshade hoodie, and lots of different brands make these, but basically it's just a long sleeve hoodie that's really thin, lightweight. So it keeps me pretty cool during the day. And then it just means I don't have to put on so much sunscreen to cover up my face and cover up my arms. And then a midweight puffy jacket. Usually I'll go synthetic. That way, if it rains on me the entire time, I don't have to worry about not being warm. That's something that you hear a lot of people talk about, like cotton versus synthetic or down versus synthetic. A synthetic jacket will keep you warm even when it's wet. Whereas a down jacket will not. The down will just compress and will no longer keep you warm. Same, cotton will also do quite a number on your body temperature if it gets wet. I like to have just one synthetic jacket at least. That way I just have kind of an insurance policy against being too cold. And then I've got a rain jacket. For every trip, I personally like to have luxury items. I like to go like pretty ruthless on gear because I don't like to carry a really heavy backpack. And honestly, I've had a lot of people over my lifetime of backpacking think that they like to carry all the fun stuff and have a heavy backpack, and then try out a lighter backpack and just realize that it was nicer. It's just nicer to be able to move through the mountains without being weighed down, without being super heavy, and without like struggling for every step. So I think leaving behind like an extra set of clothes actually in the long run will make you have a better trip than the comfort of having new clothes to put on. But I like to have some things that make me really happy on every trip. The thing that makes me the happiest is to have a fresh pair of socks for every other day, and I tie them in little individual bags. I don't know what happened. I just like hit a certain age, and then all of a sudden fresh socks were just like one of the best things that life could provide. But you should find out whatever works for you. A wooden cutting board, because I like to make really fun little charcuterie boards and cut up all the things and make it real cute for lunch, but that might not be your cup of tea. A pillow, a book, or a journal, depending on the trip. And then the thing that's most ridiculous, but I still love, is to bring a cashmere sweater for camp, because it's pretty sweet to like be able to pull off all your sweaty clothes and then put on cashmere and feel like you're really riding high. Let's talk about food planning. This can be really stressful, especially for longer trips, but I don't think it has to be. For one thing, when you've gone for a long day's hike, pretty much anything will taste pretty good with enough hunger. So that's really helpful. I think the best way to think about food is to kind of pick your category of style and then plan food around that. So what do I mean by that? This is how I like to break it down in my head. We've got like light and classy on the far left. That's going to be your lightest, simplest option. Then we've got like a midweight gourmet in the middle. And then we got like full on cooking. So light and classy is like this. Basically, it's just going and buying all of those weird pre-bagged meals that you see for dinner. And then for lunch, you have some snacks. And then for breakfast, you have oatmeal and like little packets of Via coffee. So basically instant coffee. And that option is about as light as I go for backpacking trips. It just requires boiling water, so I don't have to like clean dishes or anything like that. It's really quick, just boil water, pour it in the bag, boom, good. The downside is that it's really expensive, actually. Going lightweight and classy is more expensive than going James Beard Award most of the time. But if weight's your priority and speed is your priority, it's a great way to go. Kind of the middle option, this is food for a 7-day backpacking trip that I guided this summer up in Alaska. Basically like revolves around having the bagged meals, but then adding lots of fun things to them to make them a little bit more exciting. So adding sausage and adding cheese and adding avocado. I really like to have fresh veggies throughout the trip. So I have like adding kale and adding peppers and adding caramelized onions and that sort of thing to the bagged meals to just make them a bit more fun and a bit more exciting. For most people, if you're just going lightweight and classy, if you're a big eater, you're going to want 2 servings. If you're a smaller eater, maybe you can just get away with 1 serving. And then for this midweight gourmet, I'll usually just go for the 1 serving packets because I'm going to add a lot of other fun stuff to it. And then here we're getting even more gourmet for breakfast. We're having like toasted bagels and salmon with cream cheese and red onion, some berries to go with the oatmeal. And this is actually one of my new favorites, is to get like one of the breakfast skillets, which in and of themselves, honestly, almost always taste gross. But if you make those and add them to tortillas and add avocado and salsa and hot sauce and cheese, then you have a really cheap, simple breakfast burrito that's really quick and has no mess. And then you can go just full all out. And this is like going to the grocery store and baking all of your meals from scratch, which is also an awesome option. And when I would go on like month-long backpacking trips, we would carry all of that stuff. So flour and baking soda and raw sugar, yeast, and full spice kits. So we had little bottles of all the different spices, and we would make pancakes in the morning or bake cinnamon rolls over a small little stove or make full pizzas over a small little stove. And all of that's possible. And oftentimes it works out to be a little cheaper than buying the pre-made meals. So that's another option. It just means that you're going to carry more weight and take a lot more time cooking and cleaning. The downside with food is that there's lots of other critters out there who want your food as well. We've got the big bears and we've got the little bears right here. And then we've got the little bears with wings over here. And all of these creatures can really kind of mess up your trip if you're not careful. A few things about bears to know. This is another thing that's a hiccup for a lot of folks when they go backpacking is they're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to sleep out there. There's bears around. For the vast majority of places that you're going to go backpacking, they're definitely more scared of you. And while there's a lot of different ways to keep your food safe and secure that we'll cover in a second, the main way to take care of your food is actually just to have a really clean and considerate camp. Down on the right side of the screen, you can see this diagram. And this is like a pretty good rough average for how to set up your camp in bear country. We've got our camp, and then we've got like 50 to 100 yards to where we'll cook and eat. And then we've got in the other direction, 50 to 100 yards to where we'll store our food. If you're really considerate and you keep a really clean camp, you don't have wrappers everywhere, you're not leaving lots of crumbs behind, you clean your dishes really well at night and leave your dishes really clean, then you're likely to not actually see any critters or have any critter issues. It's the people who like have a really messy camps and have dirty dishes out and have wrappers strewn around that no matter if they have their food in bear canisters or not, they might get visited. Keep that in mind as you're camping. There's a bunch of food storage options out there. I started with saying that I was going to go to the Olympics and they require hard-sided food canisters, which are like these ones right here. But if they don't require that, they might also instead require an Ursack, which is the one on the far right, that white one. And those are awesome. They're basically like a soft-sided bear canister, but they're also really expensive. Bear hangs, you see a lot of people do that, and it's theoretically good, but it takes a lot of time to do it really well. And I'd say the vast majority of people do it really poorly and ineffectively. My favorite is when I see people hang their food like literally right above their tent, about a foot above their tent. So don't do that. Some places, especially if you're going to a more developed campsite, might just have like pre-existing bear bins. And so then you wouldn't even need to worry about it. You can just use those, and that's awesome. And places where bears aren't quite as much of a thing, you can just sleep with your food. You still want to keep it away from the ravens and little mini bears and the other creatures, but you don't need to worry about the big bears coming after you. So you can just sleep with your food and keep it safe that way. Which brings us kind of to this topic of leave no trace. I like to think about leave no trace as like an idea, an ideal, but not like a set of hard and fast rules, right? Everyone goes to the mountains for their own reason. And I don't want to tell you how to relate to the mountains or how to relate to your outdoor space. For me, I go out there and I love those places and I want to treat them with a lot of love and respect. And think about leave no trace as some like ideas for how to do that. The first idea of principle of leave no trace is to plan ahead and prepare. I think we've covered that pretty well. The next one is to travel and camp on durable surfaces, which just means not putting down your tent right on top of all of the wildflowers that have been spending a lot of seasons struggling to grow. Spending most of your time in designated campsites or on designated trails, or walking on rock and scree and surfaces that aren't going to wear down. We've talked about pooping and how to do that. So disposing of waste properly, that's a big one. Leaving what you find, which is so not taking tons of wildflowers or rocks with you back home or antler sheds or that sort of thing. Minimizing campfires, especially with how dry the mountains have been these days, at least in America, being really considerate about when you're going to have a fire and how you're going to take care of it. Respecting wildlife, I think that's self-evident. And then just being considerate of other visitors. The mountains are getting really busy these days. There's a lot of people on this planet and a lot of people are really excited to go backpacking, and that's awesome. And everyone's out there for maybe their own reasons. So just respecting the way they're choosing to spend their time. I want to take a second to cover about kind of the scary side of backpacking. I don't like to sugarcoat that spending time in the mountains can be risky, right? We're a long ways away from hospitals and we're a long ways away from emergency care and help. And there's a lot of hazards that can go wrong. So just having not stress, but awareness of where you are can help inform your decisions. We've seen the little orange inReaches a few times in this slideshow. I think they're totally awesome and super helpful. And I carry one every single trip that I go on, but also you don't need one. Just leaving a plan with a trusted friend is awesome. Know that the vast majority of the time your plan is going to happen a little different than you anticipate. So don't like tell them to freak out and call 911 if you're an hour late from your intended time. Give yourself like a little bit of wiggle room. So if I was going to get back tomorrow morning at 8 in my ideal time frame, I might tell my person that they should get worried by tomorrow at 8 p.m. instead of 8 a.m. So just so I have 12 hours in there to play with in case something goes not quite to plan. This is the biggest one, the know your limits, play conservatively one. And I think people don't think about this quite enough. They think about emergency preparedness as all these technical hard skills. But I feel like when I look at emergencies that have happened, the vast majority of the time, it feels to me like the primary factor was actually group dynamics. So do you feel comfortable sharing openly and honestly with the people that you're with? Do you feel comfortable saying, hey, actually, this doesn't feel quite right. My gut's tingling. How do you feel about this? Can we talk about this openly? Oftentimes, there's some sort of power dynamic that's at play where communication kind of gets messed up, and that's where the action happens. So just being grounded enough to share openly how you're feeling and make good risk management decisions as a group, and not relying on just any one person to do that, even if that person has a lot more skill. We talked about bringing a first aid kit and what to put in there a little bit and what to use. Lightning and thunderstorm awareness, that was how I got hooked on the outdoors, was just being around that massive raw energy. But it can also be really scary. So I'm not going to cover how to deal with lightning right now, but it's a good thing to just put on your list of things to look up real quick before you go on your first trip. Consider bringing bear spray if you're in bear country. And that's just really high intensity cayenne pepper, basically. So it's not going to really hurt the bear, but it will sting the bear pretty badly. And that's just if you were to get into a situation where a bear's coming at you. And then carrying the 10 essentials, again, just another thing to put on your little list to look up afterwards if you don't know what those are. Just a few items that you'll always want to have with you. Before you go out, I really recommend watching a quick video on how to pack a backpack. Think about weight distribution amongst your group as a matter of equity, not equality. Meaning, we want to think about a backpack's weight as a percentage of your body weight. If you're the smallest person in the group and you weigh 70 pounds less than the biggest person in the group, your backpack shouldn't weigh the same amount as theirs. So it should be distributed with equity across your group. But knowing how to pack a backpack will make a heavy backpack feel a lot lighter. So give some consideration to that. I often recommend going for a day hike or many day hikes with a fully backed backpack beforehand, especially if you're going to plan a trip that's a little bit more than 3 days, more like 5 or 6 days. You want to just like get your hips and your shoulders a little broken into the feeling of it. And that way you can sort out any soreness or blisters that are forming or anything like that well before you're actually on your trip. Another big mistake that people always seem to make going into their first trip is to buy boots like the week before their trip and then never wear them until they actually end up at the trailhead. And then within like 35 minutes, they got these gnarly blisters. So make sure that whatever boots you end up with, or trail runners or whatever, you break them in well beforehand. This is random, but also another thing that happens to a lot of people is losing their keys, and then they finish the backpacking trip and then they have no idea where their keys are. So whatever works for you, just keep track of them. And then leaving some, I love to leave La Croix and some snacks and a full fresh outfit for when I get back to the car. That way, if it's been raining the entire time, or if I'm just sweaty and gross, I can trade out all those clothes and have a nice simple car ride home where I'm really comfortable. For me, backpacking has just been a really fun opportunity. It's not so much about the technical skill anymore, just about being able to experience really beautiful, wild places with the people that I love. This is a trip that I was able to take my mom on for 2 weeks up in the gates of the Arctic National Park up in Alaska. So really remote, and just had a wild, hilarious time. Playing music with people, taking some slow time, fishing, seeing the world, seeing really incredible places that I would never get to see if I hadn't had backpacking as the reason to go there and explore. Getting a little dirty and wild and rugged, and letting go of the cleanliness and the wearing fancy clothes that I have in this other city life. Seeing outrageous moons and outrageous skies. If you haven't seen the desert sky, you may never have seen what a night sky can look like with just incredible, incredible stars. Camping in weird places, like camping on glaciers. This is up in Alaska in the Chugach Range. Pretty awesome campsite to wake up to in the morning. And dancing with people, just being ridiculous and goofy. Because why not? Because no one's there to watch and judge. But backpacking can be whatever you're excited about. If you're excited to go backpacking and you want to kind of take a deep dive into backpacking, but you don't feel like you have the time or the capacity to learn kind of everything you want to know, or you want to go just a little bit more in depth with someone who knows a lot, I've got some backpacking trips coming up this summer. And we've got 2 trips to Denali at the Whale's Tail. This is a pretty incredible fly-in trip. It's one of the coolest flights in Alaska, I think, to fly out there. You fly through the Ruth Gorge, these incredible walls that are twice the size of Yosemite, and then land on this high alpine tundra with 2 really big glaciers around you. But it makes for pretty easy walking and a really cool way to experience those massive mountains. Then we've got the Lake Clark High Route from August 10th on in 2023. And that's a really cool trip. I did that trip this last summer. And this time around, actually, we're going to do this really cool thing where we're going to end by hiking right into this Windsong Wilderness Retreat, which is this really beautiful lodge that this guy has built in the national park. He had the land before the national park was made. And so we'll end there and have 2 nights there to just be in the wilderness before re-entering that other world. And then having a trip in the Wrangels, which is this massive landscape the size of Switzerland. And that trip, the exact details are still coming together, but the dates are set. A lot of time walking on big, massive glaciers like this on that trip. So we'll cover at least 5 of these really big glaciers, which is a really cool time to walk on ice, explore big ice formations, explore these massive moulins that go down into the glacier. And then next fall, Southwest Canyons. So we'll spend quite a bit of time walking through these big, massive sandstone canyons, seeing quite a lot old indigenous architecture in those canyons as well. And then throwing in a bit of a curveball with some rappelling, a little bit, just a tiny bit of technical terrain to spice it up. And really, people, whatever questions you have, however obscure they are, no worries, feel free to reach out. Thanks, everyone. Have an awesome day.